Welcome back to another exciting episode of Limitless Lives. In today's episode, we have the pleasure of hosting Rachel Morris, a highly accomplished and accredited business coach with nearly 2 decades of experience. Rachel specializes in supporting working parents as they embark on the challenging journey of integrating their careers and family life. Rachel's expertise extends beyond her personal experiences, as she has also worked with hundreds of working parents throughout her career. Over the last 10 years, dedicated to the role of coaching in the parental transition, Rachel has become an expert in assisting parents find balance as they welcome new family members without sacrificing their professional aspirations. This promises to be an enlightening conversation that will shed light on the complexities of balancing parenthood and careers. So let's dive in and uncover the limitless possibilities for working parents in today's dynamic world. Rachel, welcome. I'm really grateful for having you join the show today.
Oh, Nilesh, hello, and thank you so much for having me. That's a very, very lovely introduction. I'm super excited at the chance to talk.
It's a pleasure to have you here, and congratulations on the release of your new book, Working Mother.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm very pleased to hear that you've seen it on pre-sale in North America as well as over here in Europe. So, yeah, it's really exciting. I don't think I
Absolutely.
set out to write a book, Nilesh, but through this work, I found out that there was something, if it was going to be helpful to people, I should probably put it down in words and get it out there.
Well, I've known you for well over a decade now, and your insights have been really inspiring. So thank you for everything you're doing in this space.
Thank you.
We'll dive straight into it. As a working mother yourself, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced, and how have you overcome them?
It's a wonderful question. And my first response to that is, have I managed to overcome them? I've done my darndest. I've really, really tried, Nilesh, but it certainly is an incredible challenge. I think for me, it was to navigate what seemed like a collision between two completely critical and important aspects of my life. Things that mattered greatly. I care about my work. I care about my professional identity and feel very, very close to it. But I was desperate to be a mother too. And I think for me, this collision in the early days felt like, how can I possibly be good at both these things that appear on surface to have some incompatibilities across them? And in those early days, that sense of feeling like I was constantly having to choose one over the other or at the expense of another, I think that bit took me by surprise. That took me by surprise when I first went in to work after having my children. So I suppose to give you a little context, I was nearly 40 by the time I had my children. So I'd really built up my career and I'd spent a long time working hard in my particular professional space. And then I had my first son, and being self-employed, I had to go back to work. And I went back to work 6 weeks after he arrived, which here in the UK is very uncommon. I know it isn't in other parts of the world, but it certainly was here in the UK. And that certainly raised a few eyebrows from unexpected sources. And then 5 months after he arrived, I was pregnant again with my second. So I found myself within the first 6 months having a baby, very much being back at work and getting ready for another one to arrive too. So I would be insincere and unauthentic if I were to say to you, I felt like I was nailing it right from the very start, because I know that I wasn't. And I think that's been one of the things that has really spurred me on to try to understand this transition for all working parents, so not just a birth mother, a lot more.
What an incredible journey, and each step along the way has brought you to where you are today, and the experiences you've had enabled you to help others in this space. You mentioned perceived judgments. Can you share a little bit more about that?
It actually came from some quite unexpected places. But certainly there was looking down on me was how it felt. And maybe that was me, maybe that was the other people. For me, particularly being a mum going back to work and going back to work so early in UK terms definitely raised more than a few eyebrows. Either that, Nilesh, or people had this sense of, oh my gosh, she must be a superwoman. And that was very, very, very far from the truth as well. I realized I needed to work because we needed 2 incomes, but also I had this absolute drive to work. I want to work. It's such a significant part of who I am.
And I'm curious to get your thoughts. Parenting styles and expectations can vary greatly among individuals too. How can parents then identify their own values and priorities to ensure they create a sense of alignment with their own unique circumstances and aspirations.
Yeah. So values is one of the topics that I think is incredibly powerful for all people in all aspects of our lives to be able to identify. So from my perspective, if I'm working with a senior exec who's running a global business, one of the things that we will do some work around is the identification of your values. And if I'm working with a parent, a father, a mother, a birth parent, an adopted parent, we'd be saying, okay, let's make sure we understand your core values and how they're at play here. And if we think about our values as being our guiding set of a timeless and guiding set of principles, everything that we filter inwards gets filtered through this value set, and everything that goes out, everything that we say and do goes out through this value set. For me, the significance of understanding our core values, what it means to us, how we articulate our values, is so important. All the research, all the positive psychology-based research that looks at the link between values and happiness, we are happier if we are living and operating and existing in line with our values, requires, from my perspective, a real considered practical exploration. As a coach, we use activities and processes to help people not only identify their values, but articulate them. I have heard fairness, Nilesh, described 50 different ways by 50 different people. So one word, but it's the definition of that matters. And once we understand what the value means to a person, and how it manifests in what they say and do, then what we can start to do is we can help the person to understand how they move on through the working parent transition to negotiate with employers, to negotiate with friends and families and partners, and to negotiate with the people around them, and to communicate why things are important to us, because it is rarely what is happening, but it is why or how it is happening that is the thing that really kind of sticks with people. So parents may want to have or agree that they have a similar parenting approach. This is how we want to bring our children up, whatever it might be. But the values underpinning why that is are likely to be subtly different across everybody. And I believe that it's at that deeper level where we can really, really get a sense of insight or get insight that we can really, really use to help articulate. And for me, so much of this thing is about working out what we as working parents need at any point in time and being able to articulate why that is, how we can make that work.
You touched on an incredible point around getting deeper into understanding our values and where they might come from, because they are so different, whether you're in a relationship, raising a child, or you're raising a child on your own, or within a family dynamic, etc. That self-awareness of where your beliefs truly are coming from, sometimes we forget to realize is they actually come maybe from when we were a child.
Yeah.
And the beliefs that were instilled upon us.
Absolutely.
And how you were raised, or the experiences you've come across during your adulthood. And some of that then transcends into a little bit of fear in terms of, well, this happened to me, I'm not going to let that happen to my child. And all of a sudden you've created this skewed value that isn't true to who you are.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And we are all products of our environment, of our experiences, of our history. And I think parenting, and I certainly noticed this when I first became a parent, we've all got some experience of it, because we've got our experiences of being parented, whether it is a positive experience, a negative experience, a long experience, a short experience, but we all have experiences of it. And so it's quite an opinionated world, this parenting thing. The right way of doing it, you should be doing it. The shoulds and shouldn'ts around parenting and working parenting can be really, really strong. And they are also incredibly diverse. And as you say, some people define ourselves in opposition to our experiences. My parents did that, so I don't want to replicate it. I think that's quite a common thing. Or I didn't like it when my parents did that, so I will assume that my children or child might not like it when I do that too, so I will change it. And I think if you take a child, invariably they have a number of caregivers. Often, majority of children will have a number of caregivers, all of whom have those different sets of experiences, as well as those different sets of values. And I think it adds to why it is a complex thing, parenting in itself. When we add working parenting into it, I just think it multiplies.
And speaking of those complexities, in your experience, what are some of the common misconceptions or myths about work-life balance that you've encountered when working with parents, and how do we debunk some of those?
As you're even saying that sentence, Nilesh, I can think, oh, and there's this one, there's this one. I think one thing that I would say is, that there's a right way to do it, that any sense that there is a right and a wrong way to navigate this parenting and this working parenting thing, because there's not. There will always be a right way for you right now. There might be a right way for your child right now. I know I have two children and they are incredibly different. And how they react and how they respond to me is very, very different. So my interactions with them have to flex to that difference in them. And so any sense that there is a right way of doing things and a wrong way of doing things, I think throws up quite a lot of challenges. And in my line of work, it's typically about connecting with the person with their right way based on their needs and their child's needs at that given moment in time. And I think links with it this sense that there is, once you've defined your way, that's a static thing, because again, for anybody listening with children, we will know that actually nothing stays still with them. You think you've nailed it and then they've moved into another phase, or you think you've just got this work-life thing sorted out and then work ramps up or changes or is restructured, or you change jobs, and it's kind of right back to the drawing board all over again. So I think one myth is that you find a right way and that's the right way and we've got to do it the right way. I'd really debunk that, because I think there are a myriad of options more than a black and white one. I think another thing is cognitively, we know we need boundaries. Boundaries are incredible things for keeping the person safe within them, keeping other things out. And I find in my line of work that quite often when people present in coaching with somebody like me, I say, and where are those boundaries? And they'll look around and say, I don't think I've got any. Step one is we definitely need boundaries. Boundaries are a wonderful thing. But I think a sense that actually once we have boundaries in place, then that is it, is also false. And I think what we are better placed to do is to view our boundaries as evolving things. Sometimes we need boundaries that are 6 foot deep and 6 foot high. We need to be really, really protected. We need to be quite vaulted inside. And sometimes we need boundaries that are more like elastic bands. They've got a huge amount of flexibility on them, or they might be transparent. People might be able to see in. So boundaries are important, but any sense that a boundary is fixed and once it's there, it remains in place, I think that's something that we can challenge as well. But we do need them, and we need to know when our boundaries need to be thick and deep and when they can be a little bit more transparent and flexible.
So you mentioned boundaries. It's an interesting one. That how do you feel working parents can effectively communicate their needs and boundaries to their employers to ensure that they get the support they need, that accommodates their responsibilities as a parent, but also their responsibilities at work?
There's quite an important almost distinction here between what a person communicates and how it is received. And I think that can cover all aspects of life. So if we go with the first part, in theory, it might take a lot of work. I might need help with it. It might change and I might feel like I understand it or not. But once I know how I feel and what I need about something, then I have direct control over how I communicate that. I can work out what matters to me, what I want to say. I can plan how to say it, and I can say it effectively. I can say it fairly. I can say it considerately, but I have direct control over what matters to me and how I say it in principle. I know that's harder to do, but actually in principle, that's the starting point. The bit that I have indirect control over is how that's received by the other person, because whether they like what I say, agree with what I say, challenge what I say, believe what I say, I've only got some control over that. And we can all use our knowledge of things like the other person, the situation, what matters to them, to increase our chances of influencing them successfully. But whether that does ultimately work or not really lies in the hand of the other person. So if I'm working with clients about communicating with their employers, then obviously we've got to have the employer firmly in the forefront of our minds when we're building that conversation. We've got to think about what matters to them, we've got to challenge the assumptions we have about what matters to them, and we've got to position our message accordingly. Because at the heart of influencing lies one key concept, which is about talking in the other person's terms. So we identify what we want, we have control over that, of planning the conversation, but we have to position it through the lens of the other person if we want it to make sense to them. And that's quite a skill. All of those different parts are quite skilled things to do.
Communicating boundaries can be challenging, especially in the workplace, and where it can lead to situations where an individual may feel compelled to make decisions due to a lack of support or empathy. How do we really get through that? Because that is quite a challenging situation to be in. If I communicate this, it's not going to go down well, and I may not get the support or the reaction I was looking for. It's not really going to reflect well on your career.
It's interesting because I think it's exactly what people have in the forefront of their minds. There's a lot of fear in there, isn't there? And fears are really interesting. I've got a whole chapter on fear in the book, and actually I start with it because they're not going to like what I say. They're not going to agree to what I say. I impact my career trajectory if I ask for. They're all things that actually, firstly, they're assumptions. We often assume things are going to be true, and we may not really know. And then the fear gets in the way and says, so don't ask. So don't try because it's not going to help you. I often look at it with clients and say, what are the risks really here? So what are the risks associated with not saying something or asking for something or requesting something or articulating something? But what are the risks with saying something? Because actually what we can often find is we think, oh, I'm going to assume that actually my line manager won't like it because they didn't agree to compressed hours for somebody else that was in the team. So I'm just not going to say anything. And the fear says to me, yeah, you're right not to say something, Rachel, because that would be bad and they would think that you don't care. There's a huge amount of risks to me actually listening to that voice and not saying, okay, thank you, but I've still got to ask. I've still got to say something. And often fear's there and it's designed to keep us safe, but often it tries to hold us back as well. And if we think about it with working parents, then actually most working parents want to make it work. They want to be great at work and they want to be great at home, and they're just trying to navigate the way of doing that. And most workplaces want their employees to be successful. They want them to be happy at work, productive at work, and they want them therefore to be able to be good and happy outside of home too, because it's such a significant part of it. The fear and the assumptions surrounding this whole topic, they're like straitjackets. I think they can really, really hold us in, but to the point that actually they don't help us, they don't help our families and our households, and they don't help our employers. So certainly with clients, sometimes I'll just say, okay, so let's just do one thing. Let's start somewhere by trying to make some change, as opposed to assuming we have to go the whole hog and make the whole change straight away. Let's just start somewhere and let's see how it goes. And fears, as they are reassured, they start to lessen their grip on us. Yeah, it's okay. Lessen their grip, and then we can work with it.
That's so true. The fear element, and also sometimes guilt.
Yeah.
The feeling of guilt, so like they're not fully present, whether they're at work or at home. What additional advice based on that feeling of guilt do you have for overcoming and finding a sense of fulfillment in both areas?
Do you know, Nilesh, guilt is such a brilliant one in this area. And actually, I'll tell you a funny story. I wrote my whole book, 55,000 words or whatever, and one of my beta readers said, but Rachel, I don't hear you talk about guilt. And it was like, oh, how interesting. Of all the emotions I pepper through it, the one that I hadn't actively, consciously addressed was guilt. And I was really, really interested about why that was. And I don't know if it's because guilt was an emotion that I personally felt less during my experiences, and so I pick up on it slightly less with clients. But when that got highlighted to me, it's put it like a real huge beacon in front of my mind. And actually now, quite rightly, I'm way more attuned to it. And I do hear it everywhere. And I think if I look at the definition of guilt, dictionary definitions of guilt talk about things like having committed an offence or a crime. When we think about parenting, is what is the crime that we may have committed that we should feel guilty about? I didn't sing that nursery rhyme 3 times today before leaving the house to go to work. Is it really an offence? Is it really a crime? And I think this ought voice that many of us carry around with us and many working parents carry around with us. I think that is this articulation of guilt. We should have done that. You ought to have done that. You didn't do that. And it's that, like all emotions, it's that emotion that is there to try to keep us in check. And if we think about it, guilt is a really helpful emotion in the right place and used in the right way. So if I say something that offends somebody, then I probably should feel guilty about it the next day, because that's the bit that's going to encourage me to apologize. But if we look at it about things to do with general parenting, then I think we can really challenge the emotions. If I feel guilty that my boss might not be happy because I left at 5:30 because I had to get to the nursery gate before it shut, does that really mean that I have done something wrong? The boss may still not be happy if I'd still have been there at 10 o'clock. So maybe it's not so much to do with the nursery and leaving for that. Maybe it's a conversation to be had with my boss about general expectations. If we can challenge what we're feeling guilty about when we feel that emotion, if it's telling us we have done something that we need to rectify, then great, we change it. But if it's not, or if it's a situational reality, then maybe the bit to challenge is our need to feel guilty at all.
And also where that might be coming from, the root.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where are these things coming from? Is this really reality, or is this some deeply buried feeling that I've suppressed?
Yeah. And is this my expectation, or actually is this an expectation that somebody else has placed on me? Whether that is
Yes.
my peer group, whether that is my partner, whether that is my parent, whether that my own parents, whether that is my employer. So is it mine, or actually is it an expectation that somebody put on me, or a few people put on me, was you should not be going back to work when you have a 6-week-old child at home. But that was theirs, that wasn't mine.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. And
interesting, isn't it?
it is fascinating. And sometimes we tether our self-worth to external factors, influences, opinions, and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we really have to drown some of that out.
I think we do. And this is this sense of being connected and being cemented to ourselves, to who we are, to what matters to us, to what we believe, to what we value. Not selfishly, but openly. Guilt's great at telling us we're in the wrong place, hey? And how often do working parents feel like they're in the wrong place? Because the guilt's going, you shouldn't be there, you should be there. And this separate point of kind of being present is really, really significant, because if we think about being present in our focus, in many ways it's a skill. It's a habit that we can start to develop and embed in ourselves, And if I allow myself, for example, to think that, for the next 3 hours I'm at work, and that's my permission. I'm giving myself permission to be at work now for the next 3 hours, which means because I'm at work, my phone is switched off. I know my children are where they are, where they need to be looked after. I am where I'm choosing to be, and actually where I'm supposed to be right now. I can kind of boundary it, can't I? But we can't give ourselves permission to, no, this is where I'm supposed to be right now, or choosing to be right now, doing what I am choosing to do. I think it becomes incredibly hard to be present. I've done it myself. I've had the children in, and it's when they were little in bath time, and I've been trying to answer emails at the same time. It just doesn't work, does it? I'm not giving either my full attention. I think choice plays a huge amount in lots of aspects of working parenthood. If we accept the to-do list is never done, if we accept that I can't be in 2 places at once, then by definition, I'm going to have to be making choices about where I'm putting my focus and my effort and energy at any given moment in time.
And that can be quite challenging as well. Whether you're a new parent or your children are older, it's that juggling act.
I did this test once with one of my children. So he was about 2.5, and I was still taking him to nursery school in a different part of London from where we live. So I was dropping one off at primary school, and then I was getting him on the tube, and the tube was rammed because it was rush hour back then, pre-COVID. And I remember almost forcing this tiny little child to get onto this packed tube, and got a few tucks along the way, but tiny little child, trying to get him in there. And I remember thinking, we've got to go faster because I'm going to be late and I've got to go, blah, blah, the usual working parent thing. And then one day I decided, okay, I'm going to slow this down, and I'm just going to go slowly. We're going to do exactly the same journey. We're going to do exactly the same thing, but I am going to approach it with a different pace about me. And I monitored this for quite a long period of time. And the difference between me rushing and being insane and thinking about what I needed to go, was about 10 minutes, Nilesh. 10 minutes only was the difference.
Wow.
And the impact it had on he and I was exponential. We looked at each other, we talked about things, we played I Spy on the tube, we sang things. It was just lovely. And it made the difference of 10 minutes to my actual diary. And I tested it for long enough to see if it was true, and it was.
It goes back to what we were talking about earlier about being present.
Yeah.
When you're in that moment, you're more mindful of what you're doing, and then you do realize, well, gosh, what did I really save there? 10 minutes, and in that time, I could have been spending quality time with my child.
Yeah.
And that time probably felt like 50 minutes because the mind was taking over. You're feeling rushed, this perceived chaos, just trying to get your child to do what they need to do in that moment. So being present and being more mindful was a good opportunity to really indulge in something more meaningful and more beautiful.
Yeah, really. And I remember one of my children wasn't very well when he was about 3. And as professional who works with confidential conversations and confidential clients, whenever I'm working, I have to have my phone switched off. Nobody can interrupt me. Doors are closed. And I remember somebody saying to me during that period of time, "Aren't you scared that if something happens to him, you're not going to know?" And I said to her, he is in the right place with the right people. They know exactly what to do in this situation. And the right place for me to be right now is here in front of this client. And I had to trust that I'd got the other part sorted so that I could take that off my concern list and focus fully on where I am, on working at that point in time. And it showed to me that there is something about the clarity of what we are choosing to do when and why. And if we are clear about it and we trust that we've got it right for that moment in time, and other people are clear about it too, then we're giving ourselves permission to be present and permission to focus. It's those moments where we're split and we don't know what we're supposed to be doing, where we're supposed to, and how we're supposed to be doing it. I think they are the incredibly exhausting, incredibly conflicting moments. So the more we can all, and I do think it's a constant quest, I think it changes all the time with children and with work, because both of them are fast moving, changing environments. But the more we can pause and reassess right here, right now, what am I focusing on? And why am I choosing to focus on it now? I think the better it is for everybody concerned.
It's also about giving yourself a little bit of grace too in
Grace?
that moment.
Did you get grace? Grace to relax?
Grace in terms of just honoring yourself and knowing I'm doing the best I can in this moment
Yeah.
and everything's going to be okay.
Yeah, that's self-kindness. And it's interesting because for me, certainly, self-care was one of the things that always came right at the bottom of the pile. I'm the mother, I'm the parent, I'm the friend, I'm the partner, I'm the professional, I'm the business owner, I'm all those different things. And then somewhere in the middle of it was me. And I find with clients frequently, I will say, what's going on? What have we got? And then if I say, and what about you? They look at me as if to go, what do you mean, what about me? What do you mean, what about me? What do you mean what do you mean, how am I taking care of myself? And so that sense of self-care to have, as you say, that moment of grace where we can just go, it's all right. I think it is very, very, very sparse for most working parents.
It really is. You touched on something very interesting about that story on the tube with your son. There was a study that I had read that more than half of the 2,000 people that were asked this question, so 58% of working parents said that increased flexibility in their schedules is a source of fulfillment and relief. But with that said, workers also reported big barriers to flexible work that truly supported parents, especially now in an environment where organizations are forcing people to return back to work physically in the office. How do we manage that?
It's really hard, isn't it? I think we need to see what changes remain over time, because I would have said to you, if we were talking a year and a half ago, I would have said flexible working for parents is one of the good things to have come out of COVID. Certainly here in the UK, I had clients message me saying, can you believe how hard I had to fight? Can you believe the 4 rounds of documents and, kind of pictures I had to put to my employer, who are forward-thinking employers, they thought of themselves, to say, please, 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 can I just work from home 1 day a week, or can I just leave a little bit earlier and pick up differently at the end of the day? And they had to fight so very hard for it. And I had women reach out to me and fathers reach out to me during COVID and say, can you believe the stuff that we used to have to evidence that we could do? Look, everyone's just expecting us to do it now. But I think my hope that may have instigated changes to stay. I think it is still there, but as you quite rightly say, I think it is currently under quite a lot of pressure. I know many businesses now are starting to say to people, let's shift that percentage back into the workplace again, into like the physical environment again. Let's get those days up where you are back here more often than not again. So I'm quite interested in how this one plays out over the next few years, Nilesh, because I think it will tell us what has fundamentally changed and actually what was just temporary.
Exactly. And like you've mentioned, workplaces, they play a crucial role in supporting working parents. What do you feel are some of the key areas organizations can do to provide a more inclusive and supportive environment for working parents?
as with many, many things in life, I think knowledge and education and understanding is one of the key places to kind of go to, because if we understand, we can empathize, we can anticipate. I started researching the parental transition, back in 2012 and looking at the different patterns that come out across all different working parents. So kind of all the kind of different groups of working parents, and identified different stages and different phases that certain things might arise. So for example, if we have overwhelm, there is a particular period in time we might see heightened overwhelm present itself in a coaching environment. And if we know that, then we can obviously anticipate it and we can be prepared to respond. There is a period of time in the parental transition where people's ability to think long term is impacted. So they go shorter term in their thinking. So we need to adapt things like our goals and our conversations to match that. Then there is a period of time where actually people start thinking bigger again. So that's when we can start talking about career goals and life goals and where's this really heading for you. But we can't do it too early because it just won't make sense. It just won't land. If we take, quite often we will support parents and particularly birth mothers in the 6 weeks before they go off to have their baby, where they're handing over the work baby to kind of go and get themselves a real one. And during that period of time, fear and overwhelm are often absolutely rife. They're really, really heightened. So we're not challenging people at that time. We're highly supporting them, with that big, safe set of hands around people. And I feel very strongly that actually from a workplace perspective, we've got a lot of stuff that we need to do to make sure that line managers understand this transition, that line managers understand what types of questions to ask, when to ask people questions about different things, that line managers can spot overwhelm, or they can spot habits, or they can spot guilt, those types of emotions that we've talked about, and be prepared to respond to it. So with some of our clients, we do quite a lot of line manager briefing. We do kind of whole business briefings about helping educate people about this is the transition, be aware of it as much as anything else and challenge your own assumptions about what you think it is. There's the classic about, when a person returns to work, that they are called a returner, whereas actually I would suggest that when most of us return to work, whether we've had 6 weeks off, 8 weeks off, 6 months off, or 8 months off, actually you're a new starter because nothing has stood still. It certainly hasn't, for the new parents, and it won't have done for the business either. I think the education piece for me is the most significant thing, because through that knowledge and that insight and that understanding can come more effective responses. And we want responses that work for employers and employees, so creating processes that allow people to have proper conversations. I so frequently hear a line manager say, can I actually ask them that? I don't know if I'm allowed to ask them that or not. I had a client turn up with me and she'd gone for an interview shortly before she had her child, and then had her child, and she hadn't been successful in getting the position she wanted, and she wanted some feedback. And her employer had said, I'm not going to give you the feedback because you're on your maternity leave and I don't want to interrupt it. And she said, no, but I want the feedback because it's mine and it's about me and it's about my career, and I can't settle on my maternity leave until I know why I didn't get that position. And there was this real misunderstanding of what both parties needed or felt the other wanted. So I think the more we can educate, the more we can open up processes where people are really articulating and really listening, challenge lots of those assumptions, I think the better it will be as we move forward into the future.
It's also about coming from a place of curiosity rather than jumping to the answer or
Yeah.
perceived judgments or perceptions, isn't it? In these dynamics where we have conversations with colleagues or peers or managers or even with friends outside of work, there's always this notion of when you're talking, they're going to come back with an answer based on what's actually playing in their head versus being a little bit more curious to come from a place of empathy and understanding or replaying what it is they think they heard.
Completely. And as a coach, I'm a professional listener, asking the questions and being prepared to fully listen to the answer. And that's a skill in itself, really listening to the said and the unsaid. And line managers now across most organizations will have coaching as kind of one of the core skills. It's considered a core skill. But sometimes people will say to me, what's the most significant shift I can make towards adopting a more coaching style of leadership? And I always say, ask a question. When a person comes to you with something, you just say, why? How else could we? Why? And what does that
Yeah.
tell you? And if line managers can do that, what's important to you? What matters to you right now? Why? Then actually we automatically make that shift.
Removes the barriers, doesn't it?
Mm,
The tension in the room, and
mm.
also creates the opportunity for support. Speaking of support, you've been doing this for over 2 decades now. What's been some of the aha moments or a real inspiring example where you've been able to truly see this harmonious integration of work life? And what were some of the key strategies or key success factors for that?
There aren't many. I think that tells us something in itself. I think organisations are getting better at supporting working parents, but I think there is still a huge way to go. I had a story shared with me recently about a senior woman in an organisation who was returning to work. And she said her CEO, who wasn't her direct report, it wasn't her line manager, she was several removed, but had emailed her and said, I hear that you're back from your parental leave today. I just want to say you've already proved yourself to us. You do not need to turn up today thinking that you need to do that again. And for her, that was huge. That just meant that she could take a big, deep sigh of relief. She didn't feel like she was back to square one. She didn't feel like she was pushing everything uphill. She was validated from the moment she set foot. And obviously she went on to continue to be brilliant because she hadn't got all that worrying baggage kind of going on behind the scenes. I think she was also a great example of somebody, and I have seen this be very successful, somebody who transitioned back into the workplace gradually, so started with a few days a week, but over the weeks built it up. There seems to be quite a lot of success if people don't just go from, I'm on leave, I'm on leave, I'm on leave, I'm on leave. I don't want to hear or see anything about my workplace to boom, I'm right back in it. Some people handle that very well, but lots of people don't. So I think people who agree with their employer, again, within legal restrictions, I'm not a HR professional, so I don't deal with the legislation side of it particularly, but we agree with our employers what I want communicating with me, why or how to communicate with me. I've got clients who set up separate emails, for example, just for the time that they're on parental leave. And then they will say to their employers, if during this period A happens or B happens or C happens, this is the way of getting hold of. So this kind of gradual return, I think there is a huge amount to be said for employers and employees communicating prior to leave. What do we think is going to work for us? What are the kind of things we think? And how will we know if that changes once your child has arrived? I think there's also, we come back constantly all the time to communication. Actually, this was a father that I worked with who had taken quite a significant period of time off with his child because of his personal circumstances. And when he returned to work, he actually realized that a lot of things had changed. So his goals, his motivation, and he spent a lot of time identifying them, working on those things, and then talking to his employer about the implications of these changes. What had mattered to him before he became a father was different to what mattered to him now. And he identified it, and he had an employer who wanted to talk to him about it and listen. And together they agreed a gradual plan of slowly working towards what he needed in his role. And it eventually served both parties quite well. It was about a 6-month transition from the role that he was in to the role that he eventually ended up in, which ultimately I think was the difference between him leaving or not. So I would say it all starts with things like clarity about what the working parents want, and then identifying how to make that become a reality, and being brave as you go through those conversations, because it throws up a lot of challenges along the way.
You mentioned employers that are really supportive. Where the tricky pieces come in is when you're having those one-to-one conversations with a specific individual. It could be that specific line manager that you have for that short period of time that might be causing the challenging conversations. That's typically where most working parents come up against it.
Yeah.
How do they navigate those specific relationships?
I write about this in the book, so I have got a chapter on communication for this very reason, Nilesh, because actually communication is a skill, isn't it? And so if a communication is an outcome-focused activity, we don't often think about it as an outcome-focused activity, but we are talking or sharing information for a purpose, for a reason. Being crystal clear about the skill of communication being something that we can learn. So everything from connecting ourselves clearly to what it is that we want to say, but then also being very, very skilled in how we say that as well, and how we negotiate or how we respond when we don't get the kind of feedback from the other person that we think we will, or that the hope that we will. And I've had clients, Nilesh, who have been really clear through hard work about what it is they feel matters, what it is they feel want. They've been very, very skilled at communicating with their employer about, I feel you want this too, and this is my idea for how we can make it work. And it still doesn't happen. And those people ultimately leave. I can think of one client who ultimately left, but he left saying, I believe I tried. I believe I tried. I've worked out what is important to me, and I've realized I can't actually get it here, but I'm actually okay with that because I've talked to you about it. We've tried really hard before. So I don't think communication is, even if we're skilled with it and planned with it, that it is automatically successful and leads to a successful outcome, because it isn't a solo activity. We have to rely on the other person too. And sometimes people find that the place that was right for them now cannot accommodate them being a working parent, whether they should be able to or not. If they can't, then that tells them they might have to also make some other choices. But if they're choosing to do it, I think that's the empowered part of it.
And speaking of empowerment, what do you feel are some real practical tips that we should start, stop, or continue doing to help parents live a limitless life?
So one of my favourite phrases is one that was gifted to me by my own supervisor. And she said to me one day, take it one step at a time, Rachel, and with kindness to yourself. And I think that for me is the most powerful phrase, because it tells me I don't have to go the whole hog. I don't have to make everything happen. I just make small but intentional incremental changes. And if I do them with kindness to myself today, it can be a big step. Tomorrow it might be a small step, but I'm taking those intentional steps nonetheless. I'm taking care of myself as I do it. I think that in itself is the most powerful approach all of us can take. There isn't a blueprint for this working parenting thing. There isn't one way of doing it. So we are finding our way, but we have to put the effort into doing it gently, bit by bit, and with kindness. So I share that a lot with my clients. And if anyone listening is thinking, how do I start? Start somewhere. Even if you think it is small, even if you think it is insignificant, small changes will change everything.
I love that. What a beautiful way of wrapping up this conversation, Rachel. It's been really insightful, really grateful for your insights and
Thank
all the
you.
work you do in this space. And once again, congratulations on the book, Working Mother. It's filled with plenty of practical considerations, strategies, and tips
It
for
is. Yeah.
working parents and also for non-working parents too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Nilesh, I've loved talking to you about this. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I know it's a subject very close to your heart as well.
It is indeed. And thanks again for coming on the show. And thanks once again to all the listeners for tuning in to another episode of Limitless Lives. Take care of yourselves and each other.